Welcome to Conversations from the Edge of Consciousness. I'm your host, Kristine Madera. For me, and possibly for you, the inner world of consciousness has always been much more real and way more fun than the so-called real material world. Growing up, I thought I was alone in this, but I'm not. There are a lot of us, and far too many have no one to talk to who shares this experience. I've been lucky to cultivate a community of friends who love to talk about the energies, ideas, and vibrations that are pushing the edges of our own consciousness, as well as our collective consciousness. In Conversations from the Edge, we share our conversations with you. Welcome to Conversations from the Edge. This is your host, Kristine Madera, and I'm here today with Alex Boianghu. And Alex is a dedicated and gifted therapist with over 30 years of study and practice. And he uses an integrative approach to therapy, emphasizing psychospiritual growth grounded in somatic therapy's focus on the unity of body and mind. And if that was a mouthful for you or an earful for you, we're going to go deep into this as we go forward. Alex is also a trained EMDR therapist, which is a technique to help people process and resolve trauma successfully. He's also a gifted couples therapist, assisting the partners to reach deep levels of awareness and compassion. Because with compassion and discernment, Alex guides and models how to positively harness the psychodynamic energies we all possess to rediscover our common and innate holistic nature. So just before I welcome Alex here, I want to let you know that you're in for a really special journey, because Alex and I are going on this adventure over the course of several podcasts to talk about the journey of wholeness. So we're not going to rush through anything. This is going to be a lot of really interesting fun. So keep looking for these podcasts because you're going to love this adventure. So welcome, Alex. It's wonderful to have you here. I'm so excited for our journey forward.
Well, people can't see me, but I'm beaming, I'm smiling, and so excited to do this. And the fact that we're going to take this as a journey and, kind of like stroll and meander along that path, that really excites me.
Well, okay. So it excites me as well. And I want people to know more about you, because I've talked to you a few times now, and there's a lot more to Alex in in what it can be encapsulated in a short bio. So can you talk a little bit more about what really fuels you, what brings you together, and where we're heading on this journey?
Sure. People ask me this question often, and it's easy to get lost in the relatives of Alex. And I don't mean relatives as my family relatives, but the relatives of my life and the circumstances. So I think I'd like to describe my journey both on the relative level of the content of my life, as well as the aspect of wholeness, the ground of being that has always been at the driving force of my life. So, it's interesting, like as we say, who am I? Who am I is you as well, and every single individual human being. And yes, we can talk about my specifics, my journey, my moments, my events, but you know what? All of us have had those. And what happens is that we take a mythical journey, all of us, as Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. So I have a hero's journey. Everybody's got a hero's journey. It's just a matter of what we're doing on that journey, where we are on that journey, who we're with, and that symbolizes that all of the events on that journey, all of them, and this is one of the most beautiful aspects of being. Being never separates from being, and that everything that happens in our life is the manifestation of our sense of separation and our desire to return to being whole. That's the journey. That's what we are all here to do. And as when we turn around and we talk to someone and we really deeply listen through their whole story, what you're really listening to is what I just described. They're seeking the same thing. And so I've been driven, my entire life, from my childhood, to really answer the question of who am I and why am I here? This has been burning. I can't tell you why I had that question. I cannot tell you that there was an event necessarily that made that question. All I know was that I've always had those two strong forces within me. So that's just a little bit of a beginning. I mean, I think my details will come out as we talk in terms of specifics, and I think
Okay.
I'll let that be organic.
So I do have a starting question for us then, because for many people who have these big questions, who am I? Why am I here? What is the nature of life?
Hmm.
And those sorts of things, there's always something that kind of either catalyzes it, or different things that happen in your life that make you really move into those questions and ponder them. And I know for me, it happened around age 7, but you had said there was an incident, well, one possibly birth, but also around age 8 that
Yes,
really was
yes,
distinctive for you. So
it
can you
was.
share that so that people might recognize an event similar to that in their
Sure.
own life?
I'll give you two events actually,
Okay.
and the first event was my birth.
Mm-hmm.
So my mother was 7 months pregnant with me, and she fell down and was rushed into emergency C-section.
Wow.
So I was born premature, and what I understand of the stories that I was told, because I don't remember, of course, was that I was in an incubator for a very, very long time, separated from everybody because I was sickly, and
Oh,
it was
wow.
it was touch and go,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they weren't sure what's going to happen to me. Well, I'm
Mm-hmm.
here, 53 years later, and that was a very defining force, an event that I can only tell you and your listeners the impact of that has had on my life as my life has unfolded, and I've put together the pieces as the themes that the disembodiment of that I experienced, the
Mm-hmm.
potential death, the the fears of coming into life under those circumstances, created a lot of contractions in my body that had
Mm-hmm.
lasted for a very long time, unconscious projections and fears. And I think that if you say to me what event really had driven that, that was the beginning of sort of saying, welcome to the world, and uh, let's here's your journey, and
Right.
that was a defining moment. And for all of your listeners, that they don't have to have the same moments, but if they can reflect on particular moments that stand out, they'll start to see that later on in their life, that was sort of say perfuming out in their life, in the way
Mm-hmm.
that they think, and the way that they feel, the way that they experience their body, the way that they interact with others, how they see themselves, how they see life, and the meaning of it all. You see, so therefore, we can't speak about all of that without
Mm-hmm.
understanding, of course, all the imprints, if you want to put them. So that was one major imprint. The second one that stands out from my childhood, there's
Mm-hmm.
there are more minor ones in the way I grew up within my family. But the one was when I was 7 years old. We had moved from Russia to the United States. I
Mm-hmm.
was 7, and I think it was the first grade. And one day, out of nowhere, you have to understand, I decided I don't want to go to school. And 7 years old, I don't want to go to school. I don't know what got into me. And I started to stroll around Jamaica, Queens, and exploring. And there was a candy store, and I was like, some candy. And I went inside, and I realized I had no money.
Mm-hmm.
And the piece of candy was that the traditional bubble gum that was around for 5 cents, and I didn't
Uh-huh.
have the 5 cents. And I stood there for a moment, and I decided not to take it. And I walked out, and I know exactly where I was in Jamaica at this moment. If somebody brought me there, I can tell them where I was.
Mm-hmm.
That I thought to myself, why didn't you steal this? Why did you not take this? And it was so clear to me. It wasn't that I was afraid of some kind of outer force.
Mm-hmm.
I felt something within me that didn't feel right in harming that person, causing them a loss of 5 cents even. And
Mm-hmm.
it sat with me very deeply that I didn't want to do that. And the second part would be that that would stay with me and eat me up, meaning that I would have to live with that experience, knowing it's not well within me, not just the other person, within me. And this really stands out in my life. And I think that kind of is a theme, has been a theme in my life.
Well, yeah, it certainly seems to have been. So, how did that shift you moving forward that really helped you on the path that unfolded for you in your life?
I think if you asked people who knew me at that time, and that's why I have some of these other memories, I think I was just a really kind of like caring, giving, loving child. I mean, my mom says that I always brought in, stray animals, wounded animals, people, eventually homelessness. I mean, it was like, my mother's like, you brought in every person, everything into the house, and so you can see that that theme, right, was running
Mm-hmm.
already before that incident. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that incident was just a reflection of an ongoing stream of my karmic imprint in this lifetime. I can't tell you why. I don't, in describing this, I want to be very careful for listeners. I don't look at what happened and how it unfolded as that it belongs to me as an identity. And I want to set the
Mm-hmm.
stage on that very clear. I'm not going to be speaking about myself as something special, unique, and I stand out as something. No, my journey is the hero's journey like everybody else's. And I did not choose my karmic imprints. I did not choose my family of origin. From some people may argue I chose, but in what I'm saying by that is that I didn't come in and experience these things because I deserve it or don't deserve it. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yes.
it's part of the unfolding of what I really intuitively believe is that
Mm-hmm.
the mystery of being who we
Yes.
are is always working through all of the blockages and misperceptions, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's why, and if you want to really look at suffering at the core is because we feel separated from that quality of being. And suffering is the energy that is meant to make us come back home. So suffering is not the problem, suffering is the invitation.
Oh, I love
And,
that.
you
Yes.
know, so this is very important. So, whatever suffering I experienced
Mm-hmm.
was the same as everybody else's suffering as an invitation to return back to why am I here is to experience wholeness. That's why I'm here.
Well, and I think, as you said in the, that's really why we're all here. And it's an individual journey in the sense that we all journey in our own experience, but it's a collective journey
It's a
that we're all
collective.
doing together. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that is part of this collective journey that really flavors it is that we have this core wound, for lack of a better term. Right now, you're gonna fix that term here in a moment, I'm sure,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
this core wound of separation, of where we
Mm-hmm.
are feel separate from one another, separate from
Yes.
our infinite being, separate
Yes.
from God or the divine, however you
Yes.
you
Yes.
categorize that. In that some of the ways that we experience that separation, that it flows through us individually and as
Mm-hmm.
a collective society, are through
Correct.
things like these deep emotional orientations of I'm not enough, of lack,
Mm-hmm.
of being disconnected in a way that I need to do something that benefits me, that also makes somebody else less, so that I feel have
Mm-hmm.
enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that not enoughness and that lack really flavors our entire global society. And you talk about this core separation from the point of view of trauma.
Mm.
So how does that work as trauma,
Sure.
and how do we experience this from your perspective?
There are two starting points here. And the first starting point was really initiated from me in reading David Loy's book called Buddhism, Existentialism, and Death, Lack and Transcendence, it was called.
Wow.
And, and I have to say, one of the most profound books on understanding what's called existential anxiety, or what I would like to term ontic separation. And
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about those two terms and what they mean. That the initial injury, if you want to call the main trauma, is being separated from that experience of well-being and fullness, right? So that is what is evident in the human condition. I cannot tell you why in this human realm that we are born into that that is what colors every single one of us. The separation, some people may call it separation from God, separation from being, separation from our divine nature, from our true nature. I mean, there's a lot of names for that. But
Mm-hmm.
let me tell you, as children, we intuitively sense that we want to experience a wholeness and a fullness and a togetherness, and the way we embody that is wanting our family of origin in our interactions to help support our coming home to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, or just the way that it is, and this is being human, that in this realm nobody gets away from being conditioned.
Yeah.
This is the realm of being conditioned. I don't know if there's other lifetimes or there's other manifestations, if we're born into other realms where conditioning doesn't happen. I don't know. All I know is that while I'm here and in this conditional realm, we all experience conditioning and we cannot get away from it. So we have the original, sort of say, ontic separation,
Mm-hmm.
followed by the trauma that happens, and then you bring those two together. And I'm going to unfold those two a little bit more. I'm just giving
Mm-hmm.
you a quick initial. Then what happens is, in the trauma on top of the existential angst that we experience, and David Loy says that the existential angst is feeling like you can't find an identity to put your hand on, that no matter how much we search to find a stable sense of self, we cannot
Mm-hmm.
find it. Like, no matter what, that the sense of self, not our true nature of being, our sense of
Mm-hmm.
self comes and goes like a mirage in a desert. You can't put your hand on it. It seems like it's there, and every time you come to grasp it, you slip through it. And what happens with that existential anxiety is that we keep trying everything in life through all of our endeavors to take the
Mm-hmm.
mirage and actually make it a non-mirage and stabilize it. You see?
Yes, that really kind of is the journey that we do, in my view, like with the mind, that we get this experience of true nature and it feels, oh my God, like here it is, here I am, I see me, I feel me.
That's
And
right. I
then
feel
the
me.
mind comes in and tries to like recreate that in each
That's
moment
right.
in
That's right.
different ways. And it never works because it's an ephemeral
It's ephemeral.
experiential state. And
It
it's
is.
not one of those things that you can say, well, these are my 10 core values, and this is how I do this. And now I know who I am because I can define myself. It's undefinable. It's only can be
This.
experienced. So I love how you talk about that. And you also talked about this existential anxiety and trauma in terms of how it works in the body, how it relates, or
Mm.
how we condition through the nervous
Yeah.
system,
Yeah.
and how
Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of our
Yeah.
the moderator between our true nature and the outside world. So can you go a little bit deeper into that for a moment?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics, and it's one that is been coming on the scene for the last 20 years with the movement in the science field in the studies of consciousness, neuropsychology, and meditation. It's all the things that the Dalai Lama, what
Mm-hmm.
now, over 20 years ago, had initiated the look at meditation practices, the mind-body practices, I should say it, like Tumo and Salung and these other meditative practices to see what's happening in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So we are fortunate to be alive at a time that the last 20-25 years has been an incubator for this, and I'm actually sitting with three books next to me. One of them is called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, and the other one is The Polyvogal Theory by Porges, and then I have another one about the nature of self. What do they all have in common?
Mm-hmm.
They all look at the brain and the nervous system as the building blocks of who we are, and then how trauma, and this is where I'm going to go here,
Mm-hmm.
impacts that. So, and I said this in my other podcasts, when we're born, when we're actually fertilized, when it's just right at the beginning, and I've done my research to take a look. When does the nervous system start to form? And it's so early on. It's the nervous system and the brain start to form so early that you realize that it is the interface. It's the programming, the matrix that interfaces between being
Mm-hmm.
and our conditional life. So that's the way I like to look at it. It is the moderator between those two. And what happens with the nervous system, as we know, that the nervous system has a function of keeping you alive
Mm-hmm.
and safe so that you can give room for being, you see? And
Yes.
that's it's like if when you notice in our lives when the nervous system is calm, all of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden we're full of energy, we're full of creativity, and we're like, okay, I'm ready to go. And there's this quality of wanting to express that deepest aspect of being. So trauma, when we're being conditioned, and I want to be very clear about trauma, there's a misunderstanding in the lay world, and I understand this, that trauma is just one event.
Mm-hmm.
I actually love, and this came from my wife, from the Greek language. She was talking to me about trauma. It means trauma means rupture. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my goodness. Trauma ruptures us or pulls us out
Mm-hmm.
from the momentum of being into then dealing with our outer circumstances so we can massage and manage it to survive and cope with it until we have room later on to resolve it. So the way that trauma works, and I often like to use examples because they're sometimes the easiest. So the mother, during the 9 months of incubation, she is the first primary source of the influence. So her energy, her mental well-being, the hormones, this is very important, by the way.
Yes. Yeah.
Her hormones, this is the key, because her hormones are a reflection of her well-being in the nervous system, because when the nervous system is not well, we're producing lots of stress hormones,
Mm-hmm.
and those stress hormones basically tell the nervous system, hey, you need to be on alert and ready to be safe and protect you.
Mm-hmm.
So the mother is the first, influence. Then the baby is born, and then we have the environment, and this environment is the immediate family, the immediate neighborhood, the immediate place that you live. You know what I mean? Like all of what Carl Jung would say, all of the collective unconscious influences
Mm-hmm.
where you are, religious, political, social, economic, and so forth, right?
Can I ask you a quick question in here too?
Yeah.
Is so oftentimes again lay perspective of trauma is that we think of traumas in terms of something physical that happens that may cause some form of like
Mm,
fear or change in the nervous system. But you had touched on this, like in the womb, it is not just necessarily what's physically happening to the mother, but what her
yes.
emotional and stress state is. So if she's under a state of emotional stress, even if there's no physical danger, that has the same hyper expression in the nervous system because it's the
Uh,
same stress hormones.
you're on to something very important here. Sorry about the noise behind me. I'm in New York
It's
City.
okay. We have life is life. There
And
we go. Yeah.
you're talking about something so important here. So, for a long time, we are nonverbal. And,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when I ask my clients or talk to friends, whatever, when people reflect back on their life, it's not often what somebody did or what somebody said. It was the energetic tone of the environment. It
Mm-hmm.
was it was what was not said. It was all of the nonverbal. And by the way, when we think of our, let's say, biological mother or father, if that was the case, or if we were adopted, I mean, whatever it may, whoever the caretakers were, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we think back of them, and I asked the person, without them saying anything to you, your parents, do you remember what it was like? And they go, oh my God, of course. My body felt tight. Where did you
Right.
feel tight? Wow, right in my chest, in my throat chakra, my belly was there. I was nauseous. And what happens is this, each one of us, our bodies responded in a particular fashion to the unconscious nonverbal material of our environment.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
this is powerful. So that's why the somatic approach to healing taps into the influence on us pre-verbally, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where the healing takes place, because the verbal is secondary. The emotions are tertiary because they describe, they're the descriptors of the sense of separation from the nonverbal, you see?
Yeah,
So,
and I used to do a hypnotherapist, and I would do the regression work with people to go to the pre-verbal and the somatic, the body experiences that
mhm,
people had, and they were so much more vivid than the experiences that they had, where they had more cognitive ability to process, where they,
absolutely.
more volition in their life on what they could do, whether they could escape or not escape. So yeah, this how these things are stored in the body is just critically important. And there's one other thing I want to input in here to be part of this conversation as you move forward that I've heard you talk about, and I've talked about this with clients as well, is that, once you're born, and particularly before you have your physical and cognitive volition to make your own choices, when something traumatic happens in a family, like if a parent beats you or misbehaves or is somehow, regresses and as acting like a child or whatever it does, it kind of threatens the peacefulness of the situation. That oftentimes, the child can't say, "Oh, well, mom's having a bad day," because
Mhm.
that's a caretaker, and it is emotionally excruciating for your caretakers to be bad, wrong, dangerous, incapable. And
Mhm.
so we often, as children, take this on. There must be something wrong with me.
That's
If
it.
I were a better person, if I were enough, if I were
Right.
good, if I behaved myself, everything would be okay. And that becomes part of the unconscious layers that whatever's going on in the world, it's because not enough. So I just want to input
I
that too as part of the conversation.
It is what you just described there is probably the most important fundamental um, impact of existential anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
trauma. The third level is what you're talking about is the formation of self, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and this is very important. So the trauma that you and I are talking about here is simply all of life and all of the influences that create separation from ourselves. Period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course we can say that there are, if I hit you with a hammer lightly on your finger versus smash it with a hammer, those are both traumatic. They just
Mm-hmm.
have a different impact, and they last longer. The hitting your finger with full force, you're going to feel that maybe for the rest of your life. Actually, you will
Mm-hmm.
remember that. Whereas if I tap you on that finger a little bit, maybe within a day or two it'll go away, right?
Yeah.
So everything has what I want to call an imprint. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that imprint matches up with our temperament. So, all of us, by the way,
Oh.
come into the world already with a certain temperament. We are
Mm-hmm.
not free. We're not blank slates. I want to be very careful here. We have temperament. I think about my own son when he was born. He had a particular temperament when he was
Mm-hmm.
born. And he still has that same temperament at almost 22 years old. And I look at myself and I say, I have a certain temperament that I remember from childhood,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so temperament meets trauma, those two mixing together. All right. What happens to the sense of identity? And you nailed it, which is this. We have to not label our parents as the bad ones,
Mm-hmm.
the ones. This comes out of object relations theory, that instead of making them the bad object, because that would then induce a sense of unsafety,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And by the way, none of this is done cognitively. Again, this is
Right.
not a decision. We don't say, okay, now look, I'm going to make you good, I'm going to be bad, right?
Yeah. It's all just that internal emotional survival complex.
It is completely unconscious, completely nonverbal, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what. And what when that happens, we experience it then as we are the bad object,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not good enough. Let's say as the most common one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what do we do? Here comes the fourth part of the journey. We develop a coping mechanism in our family called the complexes and the archetypal expressions. So, for example, Carl Jung talks about these archetypes, and I love them. So the caretaker, the good one, the bad one, the straight A student, the perfectionist, the troublemaker. So, you have all of these roles and masks that we develop. Why? Because we somehow get very creative in our family of origin, and we use that mask to get our needs met the best that we can, right? And
Yes.
that mask becomes so deeply ingrained in us that we end up thinking and believing that the mask is who we are.
Yes.
We don't know yet that we are not the mask. And what happens is that the mask, because it's ineffective and it's very rigid. And let's talk about what the mask is. The masks are basically perceptions of self and then coping mechanisms, relating mechanisms. So let's use an example. Let's say there's a child in the kitchen, and I just have this image. It's a daughter and her parents, and everybody's cooking, and the daughter is cooking, and she drops a glass of water, and the father turns around and says, "You're so stupid for doing that," right? And in that moment, she's being helpful, she's doing things, and all of a sudden, she experiences in her body, the initial is the response in her body. That will be first. And there'll be a contraction. In her own unique way, there'll be a contraction. There'll be a squeezing down of the expressive energy, you see? And it's like a capping of the sunlight. It's like bringing clouds to the sunlight, right? And in doing that, she still wants to feel part of the family. She's like, "I'm sorry, Daddy, that was my fault." And here comes the beginning of "it's my fault." And what does she do? She becomes a good little girl, and she says, "Okay, Daddy." And then she goes, "I'm going to go clean other things too." And all of a sudden, cleaning up and doing these things, and she grows up to be a perfectionist. And she's in school, and she's going to school, she's going to college, and she's so stressed out. She gets straight A's, but she is a mess.
Because you're never enough.
Because you're never enough.
Yeah.
And this is what we resolve in the work that I do with people. We deeply resolve that.
Yeah, and that really is, coming back to our original conversation, the journey to wholeness. It's not something that's outside of you. It's kind of, you talk about it in terms of unconditioning or deconditioning all the aspects of development or conditioning that interfere with knowing yourself as whole and the experience of wholeness. So we've talked some here about trauma and how, trauma is connected with the nervous system and this kind of stuff. But a lot of people have never had a real identifiable experience of wholeness or what life might be like their ordinary life might be like if they were kind of in this orientation or experience of wholeness. So can you talk a little bit about that so we can contrast those and we can kind of set this journey up?
It begins in the following. It's in the understanding of why we become addicted to experience, what we crave in experience, right? Let's take a look at that, for example. We are in the unconscious habitual tendency. We're driven to seek experience as a way, and this is Rupert Spira's language, and it was beautiful when he said this, that all of seeking is intended to stop seeking. And when I heard that, it completely resonated and blew me away. And he said it in such a beautiful way. All of seeking is to end seeking. So let's do an example. You're going for your ice cream, and you take that bite of ice cream, and in the moment that you experience all the flavors, right, really fully in that moment, you're no longer wanting anything.
Right.
The sense of seeking is gone. If you truly are there, you really experience the expression of the flavor. That moment, then when it fades, right, leaves us craving because we're beginning from a sense of lack, right? So, and then we're seeking temporary experiences to fill up the lack, which it cannot do. So where do we begin? We begin by the embodied experience through breathing. I want to begin with breathing all the time. And so when you and I talk about a deconstructive process, we have to be able to let go of all the filters of the trauma to have moments or a moment or 5 minutes of, it's like, I want to sit on the beach where there are no clouds. Alex, can you tell me how? Can you tell me how we're going to do that? Yes. Right. What we're going to do is we're going to use these methods that have been passed down for thousands of years of helping decondition so that the clouds can part and you can see the sunlight. right?
Yes.
So we need the methods to do that, and there's a progression of how to do that, and the path is laid out very beautifully from in many of the world traditions.
Mm-hmm.
They lay them out, and the first is breathing. Why? And the brilliance of breathing is because the breathing calms the nervous system down.
Yes. Yes,
Incredible. Because
absolutely.
now let's reverse this for a second.
Okay.
When trauma happens,
Mm-hmm.
what's the first thing that it gets impacted is breathing.
Right. You
Whenever
contract.
we contract, so we go from full breathing, full what we call three-part yogic breathing,
Mm-hmm.
to all of a sudden a shallow breathing, and we end up with approximately 30 to 50% of our full lung oxygenation capacity.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to think about that. Therefore, as children, teenagers, and then young adults, we have lived that long by reinforcing to the nervous condition that we are still under duress, stress, and threat. Even as we're living our life, having our relationships, going to work and stuff like that, in the unconscious arena, the nervous system is still wired. And let's get this. Why is there so much diagnosis of anxiety in the United States? Let me unpack that one in 2 seconds. It's because
Okay.
of this. It's because we are so wired from early on within the Western world to live a certain way
Mm-hmm.
that creates a separation from our wholeness. And then we walk around trying to fulfill the mandates of the way that we should live, which supports the separation. And then we wonder why we struggle from anxiety.
Yes. And you've said that beautifully because that really is all of Western society, and particularly in the United States, is set up to reinforce separation. Because if we
It is.
think about all those things that we want, that we think that we need more of to feel like we're enough. So, more fulfillment in our work, more money, more success, more all of these different things,
Right.
they don't actually produce the effect because
They
that
don't.
original conditioning doesn't shift. And so we spend our whole lives doing that and you can
Correct.
see this because when you look at oftentimes people who are highly successful in, societal terms, or have made lots of money, or have other kinds of lifestyles or lives, like professional athletes, that other people think, oh my God, they've arrived, they're enough, they're wonderful, that they still act out of this original orientation of I am not enough. So, you can see that there's no external way to fulfill
That's it.
that internal drive. And I know from when I was I've done a lot of mind body fitness work. So work in the fitness industry, and really it was all about training people, like you were saying, to breathe better. Like that was the original thing. How do we breathe in a way that we have whole breathing? Because oftentimes we just habitually have a stress breath. So, and I always say you can be sitting on the beach in Tahiti under increasing your stress hormones because you're breathing out of habitual stress breath. And so I love that you bring it all to the breath. So what are some ways, like what are a couple of simple ways that we can begin to pay more attention to that breath and practice calming the nervous system between this conversation and our next conversation?
There's a whole field of the science of breath, right? I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
incredible. And, it's deeply rooted in the Eastern traditions. Within yoga, it's pranayama, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the breath work coming from that system. And you don't have to be religious or follow any path. Those methods are powerful for everyone and anyone.
Yeah.
And then in the Buddhist tradition, we have a whole compendium of breath work that's associated with certain movements and
Mm-hmm.
certain meditative practices that relieve the stress in the nervous system, and then we abide and rest in our natural state, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's some of the most basic breath work? What we call full breath, right? The full breath simply
Mm-hmm.
consists of learning to breathe what we call into the belly. It's kind of the belly breath, we call it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's where the diaphragm expands downwards, all the way down. And we don't realize that when we take a full breath, our diaphragm squeezes down our internal organs
Mm-hmm.
very, very far down. And we take a full breath in, and that oxygenates us. It tells the nervous system, oh, everything's okay right now. And in that moment, most of my clients, they're shocked, by the way. They come to me in the first session, we do breath work right away.
Uh-huh.
And they're like, oh my goodness, I feel amazing. I feel wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, they start to feel the way that they've wanted to feel for so long, simply by breathing. But here comes the next part of it. By breathing, you then can deal with the material that's coming up for you. You set the stage in what I call, how am I going to relate to the conditioning experience of life? And the more we breathe, the more softer and gentler we become, the more our heart chakra gets involved. Because when we relax and we breathe, there's a sense of well-being that wells up almost all the time for people in what I call the heart center, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then as that starts to open up, we start to view and understand ourselves from a more compassionate place.
Mm-hmm.
So breathing opens the door for the beginnings of that transformation of the misunderstanding of self.
It truly does, and it kind of opens up the parts of the brain that can view whole, like, experience as whole experience, and not as the linear parts of the problem.
Correct.
Because that linear mind that's activated from stress always seems to sort of orbits around the problem and trying to fix the
Correct.
problem, and what can I do to make this problem better, and doesn't really look at the whole space. But our brains have the capacity for wholeness, obviously, or we wouldn't be on this journey. And that breathing, in my experience, is it really activates that
I
parts of
want.
the brain that see us as whole. Yes.
I'd like to take what you said, and if you don't mind, I'm going to adjust it a little bit.
Okay, perfect. No, do that, please.
Our brain doesn't produce an experience called wholeness.
Oh yeah, yes, true.
So I want to be very, very clear about that. We are whole, and
Yes.
the experience of wholeness. And I want to give it some qualifiers here. What's that? What is that? What are some characteristics of that?
Yes.
One, it's a feeling of expansiveness.
Mm-hmm.
It's a feeling that we are spacious, that we are timeless, that we are radiant, that we are present, that we are knowing, without any defining characteristics of conditioning. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that in the West, we often associate that now with the brain research, that when we relax the firing of the habitual patterns from the brain perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then all of a sudden we're going to experience wholeness. That's the brain. The brain does not produce wholeness. I want to
Okay.
be very clear.
Yes.
It's our natural state,
Mm-hmm.
and then our bodies and our brains. It gets very interesting. Are the expression of that wholeness, meaning that wholeness is the operating system that gives birth and expression to the manifestation on a physical realm of who we are. So therefore, the brain and the nervous system are tools and manifestations of being to experience life, right?
Yes, and
You,
I can see that as being our next conversation. So, is there anything that you want to say to kind of wrap this one up or finish that thought? And then I think we've got our next conversation just ready to roll.
everybody remember, you are whole. There's nothing wrong with you. There has never been anything wrong with you. You
Yes.
are whole. You are here to express the fullness of your being, period.
Absolutely. And I'll add to that, you are enough, because I keep hearing that more and more. So I just want to add that in there, because being enough is part of wholeness. You can find Alex and communicate with him via the links we have for him at the conversationsfromtheedge.net website, and also in the podcast notes. And Alex has a really special gift for everybody that you can also find in those places. I'll put a link in there for you. So Alex, can you tell us about this beautiful meditation that you're sharing?
Yeah, this is quite lovely, this meditation practice. We often are seeking in our lives to experience wholeness. If we really look at our experience, we want wholeness through all of our experience. And wholeness is that quality of being that's already available to us. And our body naturally expresses that quality of being. That's what embodiment means. And what we're going to be working with in the body is the 7 chakras, or the 7 energy systems, energy points And each one of them uniquely expresses a certain quality of being. And what we'll be doing is accessing each chakra, doing a little bit of breath work to clear away blockages and stagnations, and to experience those qualities then, and then to allow those qualities to settle deeply within the whole body, and then also to pervade our lives. That's the essence of what our meditation is going to be.
And I've done this meditation and it is really luscious and lovely. So I invite everybody to check that out. And you can, again, check that out at conversationsfromtheedge.net or under the show notes. And Alex, you also have a course coming up in September that people might be really interested in if they want to dive deeper with this. So I will have information on that course in the show notes, so a link for people to find out more, and they can email you directly about that. But can you tell us a little bit about this course to let people know what they might be in for?
Sure, I'm really super excited. I've been meditating since I was a teenager, so it's been a long time, and I've been fortunate enough to be trained by some amazing Tibetan Buddhist teachers, and then some Western teachers, and some Advaita Vedanta teachers from the Hindu system. Mm-hmm. So in being trained and given permission also to teach meditation, I have learned throughout my life that people come to meditation with the best of intentions, because they have this sense that meditation will help them make deep contact with who they really are. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, a lot of meditation is being taught, and there's a lot of misunderstanding in the West and how it's being taught. So I really have tried very hard, this will be the third time that I'm teaching this course, to make meditation something that is accessible to everyone, and to understand the most important thing. Meditation is not a technique, it's a way of being. So therefore, life is meditation, and we'll get into what that means in the course. But the course consists of 8 weeks. We'll meet once a week, 8 Thursdays. And what we're going to practice together, one, is understanding the point of meditation, who we truly are, and then experiencing who we truly are through these methods, and then learning to integrate these methods through life, through moving through life. So the point of meditation is very practical. It's how to be, how to interact, how to go shopping, how to interact with loved ones, how to go to work, how to be with oneself. So this course is entitled Embodied Non-Duality. And the reason it's called that, embodied, means that we begin with the body. The body keeps the score. The body also heals. It's through healing the internal energetic space that then thoughts, emotions, and sensations follow suit. We cannot change our experience through thoughts, emotions, sensations. They can only be changed by shifting the energetics in the body. And we can do that through meditation practice. We'll be learning what's called one-pointed meditation. We'll be learning what's called insight meditation, and we'll be learning what's called non-dual meditation. And those are the three that we'll be learning. And we'll be practicing them for an hour, hour and a half together each week. And so far, the reviews have been phenomenal. It's really changed people's lives. I'm really honored to be doing it, and I love what I see.
All right. So if that sounds interesting to you, check for the link in the show notes, and also at conversationsfromtheedge.net under Alex, you can find that information as well. Thank you, Alex, though. Is there anything that you want to say about how people might, connect with you more before we wrap up?
Sure. They can go to my website, journeytowholeness.health. They can email me personally. It's my first and last name at gmail.com. People can call me on my cell phone. It's included. I don't have no problem. I love what I do. What I do is who I am. I spend my days swimming in these waters of exploration. And my days are filled with this space of being. And I am moved to assist people on that journey. That's what I'm here for. Well, and I'm just feel so honored to be able to talk with you and go deeply into these things, because these are the things that excite me as well. I'm so excited about our journey together. Well, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation. Absolutely. See you next time. This is your host, Kristine Madera. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation from the edge of consciousness. You can find all our conversations at conversationsfromtheedge.net.
You'll also find links to schedule a private conversation with me or any of my friends, as well as tools to help you expand your own consciousness and explore what's possible for you outside the boundaries of your current perceptions. Feel free to use this podcast to start your own conversation by sharing it with friends, on social media, in your blog, or even in your own podcast. And as always, live the adventure of pushing your own edge. It's the most amazing adventure there is.